thank you, Hunter, for allowing me to speak. Much like Ray Tierney, this is the first club that has allowed me to come talk to you guys, so thank you so much for letting me do that. As a granddaughter of New York City firefighter and a lifelong New Yorker, I've watched our city and all of our towns here get destroyed by the invasion at the southern border. And it's affecting New York in particular because of the sanctuary city status that our mayor and our governor have declared. But that's not to take the blame off of the federal government and Congress, because they're sitting there silently while our city and our towns and our state overall are getting decimated with a population twice what New York State holds currently. This is a problem for our state because there's a strain on our resources. New York State, as it is, has a budget deficit that we can't meet yearly. Now we have twice the amount of people that our city and state are responsible for. This is cutting into emergency rooms. If anyone's noticed, our emergency rooms are a lot more crowded with individuals who cannot pay for the services they are seeking. Just this week, it was announced in the news that VA hospitals are now denying our veterans health care in exchange for illegal immigrants that they are now taking in. It is also a strain on our city. They are taking up resources that most of us here in New York can't even afford, like posh hotels in Midtown. We're building giant facilities to the tunes of millions of taxpayer dollars, only to find out that those facilities can't withstand our winter storms here in New York, and they are now taking over public schools in New York City and kicking students out of those schools to house migrants. So this has become a pervasive problem, particularly here in New York, and it's a drain on a lot of our resources here, but in particular it's a stressor on our students and our families. I don't know if a lot of you have seen, but the migrants that are currently in the city are starting to move out here toward Long Island, and as they do, they're knocking on doors. They're asking you for the shirt off your back money while you're struggling to feed your own kids and put food on your table. They're taking up areas in places that they are not welcome because they did not come here the right way, as so many of us did. The issue here is we can't afford to keep taking care of them. Now, Governor Hochul just announced her new budget for New York State at $233 billion. $2.4 billion of which she has already earmarked for the illegal immigration issue that we have going on here. Where does she plan on getting the money for that? The short answer is cutting your services and your resources. We've already started to see that. There are hiring freezes on our cops and firefighters. Our health care is changing. If you have state health care, they're not paying for as much as they used to. All of these services, and I could continue on, but we get the gist, they're changing, not for the better, because they're looking for ways to cut your services, your resources, so that they can pay for the millions of people they brought here illegally over our border. Now the issue with that is they can't cut enough services to cover the amount of people they brought in. There is a $7 billion deficit currently this year just to take care of those migrants. So where else are they going to get the money? Taxes. The problem with that is we're already being taxed insanely high amounts. If any of you have noticed, the more you work, the less you get paid. Because I've noticed in my paycheck, more than half of my paycheck is now being taken away between federal and state taxes to pay for things that we don't agree with down in Washington, like sending $800 million to Zelensky over in the Ukraine. So what are we going to do about that? The issue is we can't change taxes from a state level, right? Now they're going to continue to tax us because they have to come up with this money. But as they tax us and you take home less in your paycheck, you're going to start struggling at the supermarket. Because I've been there, standing on the supermarket line, tallying up what I've got in my cart to make sure I can cover it. Because everything in the supermarket is starting to increase in price as well. Walmart sauce went from 98 cents a jar to $1.52 in the last 6 months alone. I know that because I buy it every week. And the problem with that is if you're taking money home in your paycheck less and less because of taxes, and now you're having to pay more and more at the supermarket, you can't afford to feed your family or put food on the table. Most people I know are working 2, 3, sometimes even 4 jobs just to make ends meet, where you used to be able to do that off of one household income. As they continue this issue, we're wondering where all of the inflation's coming from, because it went down a little bit about 2 years ago, if anyone noticed, in the midterm elections, when President Biden artificially deflated prices by going through our gas and oil reserves for the midterm elections. So that leaves us with no gas, no oil, and a heck of a lot of inflation going on. I don't think, personally, the gas and oil issue is going to get any better while our Secretary of Defense is firing missiles at Yemen from his hospital bed down in Washington, D.C., and our president is taking a nap. So the problem then becomes, it's on us to bear the burden of this invasion going on at the southern border. As if that's not bad enough, aside from your kids being kicked out of their school, in comes everyone who they're trying to push out of the city. Where are they going to go? The empty houses in your towns, the empty apartment buildings, the office buildings they cannot rent out because people can't afford the leases. They're going to start filling them up with all of the people that they don't know what to do with. All of a sudden, people are going to end up in your school district. Now, I don't know how many of you guys got the COVID vaccine or did not, but I know I ended up leaving my job over the COVID vaccine back in 2020. So while we're standing here thinking about how many people had to make difficult decisions over that vaccine, they're going to start pushing school children into your school districts who have no vaccines whatsoever, who are carrying diseases that we have not seen in the United States in over 50 years. And as we look at the schools, now I was a school teacher and I have two young sisters who are currently in our public school system. I'm already outraged at what's going on in the school systems because our school systems are under attack by the left. They are bringing in DEI, gender studies, they're pushing parents out, and frankly, they are attempting to deny parents the right to parent and educate and raise their own children. I have a problem with that. And I have a problem with the fact that we have no control over that unless we gain control in Congress or in other areas of our government. And they think that they're so clever in doing all of this and we don't see what's going on, so they just keep pushing. And that goes back to this gentleman's question about how is this legal or constitutional? It's not. But the answer to that is who's stopping them. And so far, we haven't seen anyone stop them. And to move on from the school districts, okay, the other issue we have is we can't move away from the inflation without drilling and fracking. Okay, so that's another problem. The situation in the Middle East is escalating. It's not going to help our oil and gas issues as we go forward. Things are going to start costing more and more. Our gas prices at the pump are going to go up to the point where you can't even afford to drive to work anymore. And we can't do anything about that if we can't drill or frack on our own land. So why can't we, if we're standing on what is possibly the largest liquid gold mine on planet Earth, right? We have so much reserves under our feet that we are not touching. And why is that? Because they're taking control of that through your green energy initiatives that they keep pushing through. By the way, out of that $233 billion that Hochul has asked in her budget, $400 million of it is earmarked for her green initiatives. You know, the very same initiatives that start talking about why you can't have a gas stove to cook your Thanksgiving dinner in, why pizza places across New York can't cook their pizza the old-fashioned way because it's harming the environment. All of those nice electric cars sitting in lots across Long Island because we can't afford them, and for the people that can, to find out they're spontaneously combusting in natural disasters or they don't drive in the cold. All of these things are showing the problems with the green energy, right? And by the way, if anyone wants to know more about the problems with renewable energy and resources, the America First Warehouse is hosting a speaker on January 25th. It is the former president of Mitsubishi. I believe he's going to start discussing some of those real costs because people don't know the real costs of green energy. They keep peddling it, they push it, they describe how nice it is for the environment, and what you don't see is those large wind turbines and windmills that they're putting all over New York are actually killing our wildlife in the ocean, and they're destroying our land upstate. So how's that for your green energy when we could be fracking and oiling, right? And drilling from all of the things that we have under our feet that we can actually use to drive down inflation. Now, while they're peddling all the green energy and DEI at you, they're also ignoring some of the other problems that we have going on here, like crime. I was a former prosecutor, and I'm an attorney. I was a prosecutor in New York City, so I got to see firsthand what goes on with bad, failed policies like bail reform, and when you have incompetent DAs and attorney generals in office who choose not to prosecute the criminals. Instead, they prosecute their political opponents. And the issue we have going on now is we're seeing violent, rampant crime across cities all over the country, but particularly here in New York, because we have a few notorious people in charge who have decided that it's not worth it to prosecute the criminals. Instead, they want to let them hang out with you on the streets of New York City. Now, I grew up going into New York City from out here. My grandfather was a New York City firefighter. My parents both live and work here on Long Island, but we used to go into the city for everything. I have heard time and again in the last 8 months how many people live on Long Island that are afraid to travel into New York City because of the crime that's going on currently there. We haven't seen crime at this rate in decades in New York City, and it's due to the failed policies of the people we have in charge. Now, I've painted a very bleak picture of what New York and America as a whole looks like, and that's the point, right? It is a bleak picture. We've heard Donald Trump say it over and over. We can't afford to be quiet about these things anymore, because the more quiet we are, the things that we don't say, the more unconstitutional and illegal things they do, and no one's stopping it. I never intended to run for Congress, but I am sick of sitting on my couch, yelling at the people on the television who I elected that I would hope would do a good job, only to find out that they're doing exactly the opposite of what I thought they would do. The good news here is we have an opportunity to fix it. So how do we fix some of these problems? To start with, we cut federal spending. If you look into where most of our federal spending goes, it is to proxy wars and nations that frankly hate America.
Yeah.
Why are we funding terrorism and other nefarious activities internationally so they can come right back to our doorstep across the border and threaten our children and our families and our communities? If you cut federal spending, you would have the ability to build the wall, which is part of my intention when running for Congress, and start a massive deportation effort, because this country cannot handle the influx and frankly the widespread invasion of this country is really what's going on. It is not a group of people seeking asylum as much as CNN might want to tell you that. It is large groups of military-aged men being dumped on our border by every other country on the planet, because they've seen the weak leadership here, and they've seen that they can do that because our border is welded open, the hands of the Border Patrol have been tied, and no one is stopping it. So what are we receiving here? We're not seeing families seeking asylum. We're seeing military-aged men being dumped out of prisons. We're seeing criminals and traffickers from international countries on our doorstep that are about to be in your community, in your children's schools, and your churches, because that's where Mayor Adams wants to put them next, is your churches and your homes, if you will let him pay you a couple $100 to let a migrant take your spare bedroom. So we have to put a stop to this, right? And we can. We can close the border. We can build the wall if we cut federal spending, which is astronomical. Currently, Congress is fighting over what they're putting the money toward. Are we sending more toward proxy wars? Are we sending more toward terrorism? This is the fight they're having on the floor of Congress at the moment. If you cut federal spending, you have the ability to build a border wall and fund a task force that can deport most of the illegal immigrants that are currently here. Biden already put about 87,000 armed IRS agents out there to come after you for not paying your taxes the right way. We can take those people and shift them toward an ICE deportation unit. So that takes care of the border. But what do we do about the taxes and the inflation? The answer to that is fracking and drilling. We need to stop the green energy talk. We need people to understand exactly what green energy is and all of these renewables. Because, by the way, did anybody notice that Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State, is currently in Davos discussing how he wants us to eat bugs to save the energy. But he flew there on a private jet, and his carbon footprint is larger than probably all of Long Island's combined. So you see where the hypocrisy is going there. So how do we do all of this in Congress, right? How does me running for Congress affect any of this? Well, you have the power to close the border because you have the power to cut federal spending. You have the power to put together an ICE deportation task force. You have the power to write legislation and laws that can bring back drilling and fracking on our own lands and stop buying oil from people who turn around and use that money for terrorism. We have the power to stop going after our citizens. Okay, we have another problem here with constitutional rights. I was at a January 6th event last week, January 6th, and the problem here is while we are not putting the real criminals in prison in New York City, we're putting people who were never charged with crimes in federal prison. And we're denying them their constitutional rights. But they're not the only ones being denied constitutional rights. They've been chipping away at our constitutional rights for many years now without us realizing. And we've hit a point where people are starting to realize because, unfortunately, regular citizens are getting that knock on the door by the FBI. Moms at school board meetings. Children who wrote memes about Hillary Clinton online are being put in prison because their constitutional rights are being taken away. So how we stop that is we write legislation to make sure our constitutional rights are protected. We repeal legislation like the USA Patriot Act that allows our government to spy on you, which they just signed again, by the way, even further to allow them to spy on you a little more. So long story short, there are ways to stop this, and that is my intention in running for Congress. Now, I am running against Andrew Garbarino, who has sat in this congressional seat for 2 terms and lied to us as Americans and gone down to Washington and then voted left on every policy that came up. And the problem with that is that's not what we're asking him to do as our constituents here in District 2. What we're looking for is real America First candidates who are going to go down to Washington and listen to what the people want and start taking back our country, because it is our country. We need to start taking back America, our America, and we can't be quiet about it anymore. We have to start standing up to people and saying, we've had enough. I'm frustrated, I'm disheartened, and frankly, I'm mad as hell. But I think we can fix it. And I look forward to the work and the challenge that entails, and I hope that you will join me on that journey. Thank you.